And joining me now from the island of Taiwan is Congressman Mike McCaul. Congressman, let me start with what's happening in the moment right before you're leaving the island. The official response of the Chinese Communist Party to both President Tsai's visit to the United States, meeting with Speaker McCarthy, your delegation's visit to the island, your own meeting with President Tsai. In terms of retaliation, something was expected. How would you describe this? Elevated, more aggressive than ever, or predictable?
Well, I think predictable, but the numbers are very high now. We have a large number of sorties. Those are Chinese aircraft, fighter jets in the air right now as I speak from the island. We have 8 ships, 7 battleships, and 1 aircraft carrier, a very large aircraft carrier. And this is in response to President Tsai's trip to the United States, but also our delegation's visit to Taiwan and with President Tsai. This is an intimidation tactic that they're known for. The size of this one is quite large, one of the largest ones we've seen. But it's not going to intimidate us.
Right.
We have every right to be here to meet with President Tsai, and it actually strengthens our resolve.
The Taiwanese themselves seem to be downplaying this. Look, you've got a firsthand look. How would you assess their defensive capabilities right now?
They're not where they need to be. If we're going to have deterrence for peace, we need to get these weapons into Taiwan. I sign off on all foreign military weapon sales, 22 weapon systems over 3 years ago, Chuck, that have yet to get into Taiwan onto the island. That will provide deterrence to Chairman Xi to think twice about an invasion. And secondly is the combat training that is occurring on the island. We need to ramp that up to a larger scale so they can provide that projection of strength and deterrence. They're not where they need to be right now.
We're having a munitions issue in Ukraine right now. The West is, and I know that that's been an issue. And I know Taiwan's got its needs of some weapon systems that we've promised. What is the best way for us to speed up our ability to make munitions? I mean, is there anything that can be done to speed things up, or is this just what happens when you're fighting a hot war in one part of the world?
Well, in Ukraine, we're putting old systems in, like Eastern NATO putting Russian in. We're using our old stockpiles in Ukraine. Taiwan, these are brand new weapon systems. And so we have a defense industrial base issue, Chuck, that quite honestly needs to be fixed. But I want to talk to the Secretary of State, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, about trying to prioritize weapons that we have sold to other countries to put them in Taiwan where the threat exists. Also, third-party sales from our allies that may have these weapons to allow them to be able to put the weapons in. What they really need right now, Chuck, are sea mines, harpoons, which are anti-ship, anything maritime, submarines, small sea drones, and F-16s. And we're working very hard to get them in right now because, time is really of the essence.
You have a sense of what the Taiwanese people want. And I say that in that we know sort of what China did before it took over Hong Kong. There was always a sense that, a lot of people in Taiwan wanted some sort of relationship with mainland China that was negotiated, that was sort of respectful. Is that what they still want, or do they think some sort of military confrontation is now going to be inevitable?
Well, they don't want a military confrontation. We certainly don't want that. I think after Hong Kong, it was a wake-up call for the people of Taiwan. President Tsai, we spoke with her today. That obviously helped her in the re-election. But I also think Putin's invasion into Ukraine was an eye-opener, right? It woke up the Taiwanese people that now you're seeing what we haven't seen since World War II, and that is dictators invading sovereign territory and getting away with it. So Putin in Ukraine, wake-up call here. Chairman Xi in his addresses to his Congress about wanting reunification of Taiwan to China, I think they're very nervous. Now, there's a political debate here. The two different parties, one party wants to talk to China, President Tsai's party. does not want to be a part of China. And I think the next elections in next January are going to be extremely important, because I do believe with the former President Mao in China right now, China is going to try to influence this next election and take over the island without a shot fired.
Make the basic case for why Americans not only should care about what happens in Taiwan, but should be willing to spill American blood and treasure to defend Taiwan.
Nobody wants that. I think the deterrence is key here. We traveled to Japan, South Korea. We are in Guam. We're meeting with our allies, our partners here, if you will. They don't have a NATO in the Pacific, but they do have partners. We want to make sure that they are ready and supportive of the United States and Taiwan. The case for Taiwan, that's a very good question. About 50% of international trade goes through the international straits, but I think more importantly, Chuck, is that the TSMC manufactures 90% of the advanced global supply of advanced semiconductor chips. If China invades and either owns or breaks this, we're in a world of hurt, globally.
Congressman, it almost sounds like the case that would be made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s of why America was spending so much money and military resources in the Middle East. Oil was so important for the economy. Is this sort of the 21st century version of that?
I personally, I think it's about democracy and freedom. And we need to stand up for that like we're doing in Ukraine. And if we don't do that, the other island nations are going to be threatened by Chairman Xi, who wants to restore imperial China. The way I look at it, my father's generation, World War II, you now have these two dictators, largest invasion in Europe, and now the biggest threat to the Pacific that we've seen since World War II. We have to stand up for these people and for our principles as well. But we don't want American troops there, and that's why the deterrence, I think, right now, Chairman Xi has to understand that it's going to cost him more to invade than not to, both militarily and economically, and his global standing on the world stage.
I want to play something that Speaker McCarthy said, because it seemed to at least shift a perception of where he is on the issue of Ukraine. Let me play it.
I think what's happening in Ukraine is an atrocity, and I think Ukraine, not just Ukraine, the world has to win there. What Russia has done is wrong. In a phrase that I use, a blank check, I use that for anything. I look at every dollar of taxpayers that we would use, but the one thing I know that in Ukraine we have to win, because it also would save Taiwan at the same time.
Are you reassured now, and should President Zelensky be reassured that House Republicans are not going to stand in the way of more aid to Ukraine?
I traveled with Kevin, Speaker McCarthy, to Poland, Romania. He's always believed this, felt this way. When you're over here, Chuck, when you talk to, and I've talked to the prime ministers and the presidents of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, what's happening in Ukraine will determine what happens in Taiwan and the Pacific. I think the Prime Minister of Japan going down to Ukraine to signal their support, and he said himself, what happens in Ukraine today will happen in the Far East tomorrow. I believe the best deterrence to Chairman Xi is a failure for Putin in Ukraine.
I have one political question for you. I know this is a very bipartisan trip. Really, there's been, not about partisan politics, and I know that's the message that's being sent. The Republican Party's had a rough week. Your party here, while you've been overseas, you've had the former president's indictment. You had what happened to the conservatives in Wisconsin. This situation in Tennessee, I don't know how closely you followed that. But if you put all of it together, it's not a good look for the Republican Party. Are you concerned that the Republican Party is not being as responsive to, say, the middle of the electorate right now, whether it's on abortion, whether it's about Donald Trump, or even democracy?
I have to say, Chuck, I'm kind of a Reagan Republican. I grew up, 1980, first president I had the opportunity to vote for. I believe in what Reagan stood for, and I asked a question of my colleagues, what would Reagan do? Reagan, who brought down the Soviet Union, what would he do in Ukraine? What would he do with respect to Taiwan and freedom and democracy and human rights? which Reagan stood for. I personally think my party needs to go to, rejuvenate itself with the principles of Ronald Reagan, who I think was a very popular president for a lot of reasons. But what he stood for is what many of my colleagues stand for in the House and Senate. We may not just be the loudest ones in the House.
All right, you seem to, I get that you sort of duck this question, but do you think right now the party's headed in the wrong direction?
I don't. I think, look, we still believe in, limited government, strong national security. There is a bit of an isolationist wing in the party that, concerns me with respect to foreign policy. And we're going to have those internal discussions, as a family. But I don't see President Biden's policies working so well since Afghanistan fell. We've been projecting weakness, and this is precisely why you're seeing aggression from Putin and Chairman Xi and the Ayatollah and Kim Jong-un, all four of them in the struggle for the global balance of power. And I think the turning point was Afghanistan when this president started to project weakness. So I disagree with your premise. I think Republicans have a very strong argument when it comes to particularly national security and foreign policy.
All right, Congressman Mike McCaul, on the island of Taiwan right now, obviously we all want to make sure you guys get home safe and enjoy the holiday weekend when you can.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.